A major win for Ohioans' reproductive rights is now being put into legal jeopardy. Earlier this week, in the red-leaning state of Ohio, 57% of voters chose to enshrine in the state's constitution an individual's right to make and carry out their own reproductive decisions, including abortion and birth control. But within days, Ohio Republicans are already attempting to silence the will of voters by eliminating the judicial branch's authority to interpret that new amendment. A group of 4 GOP lawmakers put it this way in a press release on Thursday, saying, quote, "To prevent mischief by pro-abortion courts with issue 1, Ohio legislators will consider removing jurisdiction from the judiciary over this ambiguous ballot initiative. The Ohio legislature alone will consider what, if any, modifications to make to existing laws based on public hearings and input from legal experts on both sides." Joining me now, MSNBC legal analyst, former U.S. Attorney in Michigan, and the co-host of this #Sisters-in-Law podcast, Barbara McQuade. Barb, when I heard this, I mean, other than being angry, you know, of course, the legal kind of part of it kicked in. I thought, I need to ask Barb about this. So, Barb, straight to the point, is this possible? Can lawmakers divest jurisdiction from the judiciary branch over something like this new amendment?
Well, not legally, Katie, but of course, if it's a legislature, they could pass laws that do this, and then it would require a court challenge to strike it down. But as you know, from like the first day of law school, there's a case in constitutional law called Marbury versus Madison, right? I'm sure every lawyer remembers that either fondly or with nightmares. And that's the case that says it's the courts that interpret the law and decide what the law is. That is the structure of our government. And so I think ultimately this would be struck down as unconstitutional within the state of Ohio. But at the moment, they have the power in the state. The GOP has the control of the legislature, so they can create their own mischief in the meantime.
Yeah, so, and Barb, to kind of carry it along the path, even if the legislature cannot enact a law to combat what the will of the voters was resoundingly, 57%, the Ohio Supreme Court is still very conservative, quote unquote, and it's a very red state. So is there a way for the judicial system, if it's being driven by conservative kind of, I guess, precepts or concepts, could they maybe kind of drive the interpretation of this new amendment in a way that defeats the purpose of having it passed in the first place?
I think they could. You know, there are 2 issues. One is Ohio has 31 restrictions on reproductive rights. And so the legislature is saying they're not going to revoke any of those. They're going to stay on the books. And so people are going to have to challenge those one by one. And so if courts wanted to do mischief, they could undercut this new constitutional amendment. There's another argument that is being floated by one of the Republican lawmakers there, and that is that this state constitutional amendment protecting reproductive rights actually violates the federal 14th Amendment right to equal protection of the law because it violates and discriminates against unborn persons. And so if the Supreme Court of Ohio were to take that argument up, it could strike down this new constitutional amendment. Of course, I don't think that's going to fly ultimately because courts have interpreted persons to mean born persons and not fetuses. But this is interpreting the law of the state of Ohio. And so the Supreme Court of Ohio is the last word on what their constitution means.
Unless people think that this is only happening in Ohio, in your own state of Michigan, Barb, there's actually a group of GOP lawmakers that are suing to block the actual implementation of a similar abortion rights amendment in the state of Michigan. So is that another option for the GOP to actually go to court and sue to be able to say, you know what, this amendment doesn't have any, ability to move forward, you cannot implement it?
Yes, it's another strategy. You know, it's very interesting, Katie, to see after the idea was let's return these decisions to the states, let the people decide what they want the law to be, that these GOP lawmakers are trying to defeat the will of the people. I think these efforts will ultimately be unsuccessful, but it really shows just a blatant disregard for democracy.
Barb, I wanted to switch gears and talk about Trump legal, but not about a case in particular, but kind of a bigger strategy. I wanted to talk about interlocutory appeals. I think we're going to see that come up a lot, that phrase, because as certain motions filed by Trump, as he loses them, he files a motion to dismiss, for example, in front of Judge Chutkan in D.C., saying that he has absolute immunity from prosecution, for example. and he loses that motion. Normally in federal criminal cases, these types of appeals that are called interlocutory appeals are not usually kind of entertained. But in this instance, do you think that because it's a former president of the United States that perhaps the appellate process would kick in and then we wouldn't see a trial happening anytime soon?
Yeah, so you're right that ordinarily there's something called the final judgment rule, as you know, which says that you have to wait until the end to be able to bring all of your appeals. Otherwise, you've had this piecemeal delay of a trial that would go on and on forever. But there are a couple of issues at the threshold that a court will allow interlocutory appeals for, and that's if a person never should have been charged criminally at all because he can't be put back in his place restored to the status quo. One of those would be immunity. The other would be double jeopardy. Both of these are issues that Donald Trump has raised in motions. Both, I think, are likely to be defeated in the district court, but they are immediately appealable. One of the things Jack Smith has asked is for the court to decide these two issues first and quickly so that there can be an interlocutory appeal quickly and stay on schedule for the trial that's currently scheduled for March. But that, no doubt, is the strategy of Donald Trump, is to delay as long as possible and try to put these trials off until after the election.
Doesn't it become problematic, though, Barb, if this interlocutory appeal is filed by Donald Trump, for example? Doesn't that mean that the trial court, the district court, for example, Judge Chutkan, doesn't have jurisdiction over him anymore and everything gets stayed, meaning nothing moves forward as the appellate courts are deciding this? And could it go even as far as the United States Supreme Court?
I think the answer to that is yes. And so I think it is likely to build in a delay. So that's why Jack Smith is urging Judge Chutkan to decide these two motions so quickly. You know, the rest of them probably are issues that even if Donald Trump loses, would have to wait until after the end of the trial. But both of these, and, you know, double jeopardy, I don't know, this one seems really just sort of silly. The immunity question is unresolved. But again, because the conduct alleged in the indictment goes well beyond the scope of Donald Trump's duties as the president, I think is also an easy loser. But I think both issues could both go to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and to the Supreme Court, and one hopes that they would decide both of these issues quickly. But that trial date in March is looming, and it's quite possible that these appeals could put that date off. Now, I think it's possible to decide them before the election in November, but only if the courts act quickly.
Justice, right? The wheels of justice sometimes move a little bit too slowly, I think, for our taste, right? Barb McQuade, as always, it's so good to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Katie.
So my next guests have been on the front lines in the fight for reproductive rights in Ohio since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in June of 2022. This past July, Lauren Blavelt and Dr. Lauren Bean of Ohioans United for Reproductive Rights joined the Katie Phang Show ahead of a special election to move the threshold of voters required to amend the state constitution from a simple majority vote to 60%. Now, when voters went to the polls, they overwhelmingly defeated that special election question, helping pave the way for victory this week when voters passed Issue 1, enshrining abortion rights into Ohio's state constitution. But now, thanks to Republican state lawmakers, they still have a major battle ahead. Joining me once again, I have the honor of having Lauren Blavelt, the co-chair, and Dr. Lauren Bean, the executive committee member of Ohioans United for Reproductive Rights. The Laurens, it's always so good to have you on the show. As I did before, Lauren Blavelt, I'll call you Lauren, and Dr. Lauren Bean, we're going to get that MD to use. We're going to call you Dr. Bean. So, Lauren, I'm going to start with you. I want to get your initial reaction. It had to have been just, you know, elation and joy to pass Issue 1 on Tuesday, but then did you ever anticipate having to confront this next GOP obstacle?
We're overwhelmed, overjoyed. Ohioans, 56%, over 56% voted yes on Issue 1 to protect abortion access, to protect their personal medical decisions, and they turned out in droves across the state. So we are unbelievably overjoyed. And frankly, not really surprised that our representatives are not listening to their constituents. Ultimately, that's what got us here in the first place. They passed over 31 abortion bans and restrictions, including a 6-week ban that is so extreme, Ohio voters had to change it. That was why we had to turn out to vote yes on 1, is because we had to stop the extreme ban. That lawmakers had the chance to hear over almost a decade as they were trying to pass that ban, from patients, from community members, from Ohio voters saying, we don't want this ban. They protested outside the State House when the ban was passed and have been working this entire time in strong coalition to ensure that abortion access is the law of the land in Ohio. And that's what it is now that we've voted in issue 1 to change the Constitution to protect abortion access. So lawmakers need to listen to their constituents. We will absolutely keep fighting, but Ohio representatives should listen to Ohio voters.
Dr. Bean, the statement that was released by those Republican legislators alleges, without any evidence, because I want to underscore this, foreign election interference, which, listen, we've heard that before. But they're also saying that they're going to introduce, quote, several bills to address the passing of issue 1. So how does your organization plan to counter what's coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, so I think that similar to what Lauren said, this has kind of been how they've been operating the entire last year. The anti-abortion politicians in Ohio have really just been kind of throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I honestly really just feel like this is another example of that, of them, just trying to find any way that they can to confuse people, trying to see what they can do to stop the people from being able to get basic medical care. And so, I think as far as what we're going to do, we're going to keep fighting. We are an organization of healthcare professionals who have frontline experience and understand why it's so important for people to be able to access reproductive health care when they need it. And also, like Lauren said, we know people who will share their stories. People are brave. They will come forward. And, we're planning on helping to amplify the message of why this is so important and why the people who signed that statement are just so wrong.
Dr. Bean, I want to stay with you because I want our viewers to understand that issue 1 was not just about abortion access. It's the quote from the amendment. It specifically declared an individual's right to make and carry out one's own reproductive decisions, including birth control, fertility treatments, miscarriage, and abortion up to the point of fetal viability. So from a medical perspective, Dr. Bean, how important was it and is it to continue to ensure that individuals have the rights to be able to make these types of decisions for their medical health?
Oh, it's so important. And we see why it's so important in areas of the country where these basic rights to be able to control your own reproductive biology have been attacked and have been limited, and how detrimental that is on women's health, where areas of the country that don't have these sorts of protections have much higher maternal mortality rates, infant mortality rates than areas that do allow and protect the rights of people to make their own healthcare decisions regarding their own reproduction. And so this is just, everything that this amendment covers will ensure that the people of Ohio will have, control over decisions that they need to in order to make sure that they're healthy and safe.
Lauren, your movement in Ohio, although may not be over yet, depending upon the challenges that are coming down the pipeline, but it's emboldened abortion rights groups across the country, with groups gathering signatures in swing states like Arizona, my state of Florida, and Nevada. What advice do you have for these states as they go forward with their own measures?
Build a strong, diverse coalition, continue to work with grassroots volunteers and storytellers, faith leaders, people from across your state, and make sure you continue to stick to your message. We had to have a very clear message to get through all the misinformation that was coming from the other side. It was so important for voters to understand that voting yes was the only way to stop the ban and protect abortion access. And keeping a clear message with all the misinformation, that's the most important strategy. And stick with your coalition, because it takes a lot of people, a lot of amazing Ohioans put in everything they had so that we could win.
And Lauren, the highly restrictive 2019 abortion ban in the state of Ohio, it was kind of put on the back burner legally while this was going on in terms of the votes. I mean, how optimistic do you remain that because issue 1 passed this past week, that perhaps that abortion ban and maybe even the other 30 very restrictive abortion bans in Ohio, that they may be off the books?
Issue 1 was very clear. It changed the Constitution to protect our reproductive health care decisions, to protect abortion access. And the extreme abortion ban clearly blocks abortion access. So it is our estimation that the legal process will be fair, and that issue 1 and what the Ohio voters have called for will stand.
Yeah, I had Barb McQuade on a little bit ago on the show to talk about the legal mechanisms that are going on, and she shared your optimism about the ability to make sure that it continues. The Laurens, Lauren Blavelt and Dr. Lauren Bean, we're going to keep an eye on what happens since the passing of issue 1. I want to say thank you for coming back to the show to talk about the success of your efforts. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.